Shalom, shalom, welcome, welcome, world changers. And thanks again, Hannah, for the beautiful music. Thank you for blessing us with your talent. That was amazing, as always. Tonight, we're going to get into Genesis chapter 38. I'm going to be reading from the canonical scriptures. I'm also going to be comparing the different manuscripts and such. If we have time, we'll get into the Legends of the Jews a little bit later. We'll see how that goes. So welcome and blessings multiplied to y'all. As always, I pray that everything that we share here today would be a great blessing to you. Increase your knowledge of the scriptures, your knowledge of the things of heaven, your relationship with God, and your knowledge of the truth. Amen, amen. All right, so if you have any questions, comments, prayer requests, feel free to drop those in the live chat, especially questions pertaining to our Genesis series. And tonight, Judah and Tamar. We're going to be reading from that. All right. One little announcement here. I think that what we're not tonight, of course. Next week, Sunday afternoon, before the live stream would normally start. Our drummer, Victor, the drummer, he is going to do an extensive drum solo. It's going to be a separate live stream. He's going to be playing the drums, and he's going to be doing like what I would call like a drumathon. What he's trying to do is his equipment, especially the cymbals, are quite worn out and cracked, and almost some of them are cracked in two. So he's going to try to raise a little bit of money by just drumming, doing like I'm not sure exactly how long it's going to be, but yeah, it might be about an hour or so long. It might be longer than that, of just nothing but a drum solo in attempt to raise some funds for Victor to replace, especially his cymbals. His cymbals are really in bad shape, especially the one of them. I'm going to have to show you guys another time. I'll have to ask him for the cymbal so I can show you. It's like pretty much ripped right in half, or cracked in half, I should say. Yeah, so you can expect that next Sunday in the afternoon. Thinking about early afternoon. So it'll be an early afternoon live stream. I'm not going to be really speaking, but Victor, our drummer, will be performing and giving you guys a drum solo and entertaining you that way. All right, so let's see what we have here in the live chat before we get moving here. We have Bluebird says shalom, everyone. Calamento says shalom to all. Hubert says shalom. Beautiful. Thank you, Sister Hannah. Going Nowhere says good evening or morning for me, since I woke up not too long ago. Pat says love the shorts and long form videos. Thank you. Seek the Lord says shalom. And Hubert says cool. Love the drums. Go Victor. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys. Thanks, Huberts. And blessings and shalom multiplied to each and every one of you here tonight. Shalom and blessings to you and your families. And thank you, Huberts, on behalf of Hannah, and also thank you for the encouraging message there for Victor as well. All right, and yeah, so welcome everyone. Blessings, blessings, blessings. So let's get into this. I'm going to do this in our typical fashion. I'm going to start with the New King James and read from that. On the left-hand side, you will see this is Genesis chapter 38, verse 1 from the New King James. I'm going to be comparing the different manuscripts as always, and we'll discuss as we go. If you guys know of anybody that would be interested in watching this, listening to this, following along, share the live stream. Genesis chapter 38, verse 1. New King James, based upon the Masoretic, it says, "It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah." The Septuagint says, "And it came to pass at that time that Judas," now again here, notice Judas is the Greek transliteration of Yehuda, or Judah. So Judah and Judas is the same person, same name. You would think, I know a lot of you would be thinking about Judas, the betrayer there of Yeshua. I would expect that he probably came from the tribe of Judah, having the name of Judah. I would suppose so. And that could be why, or I shouldn't say that could be why, but maybe that was one of the factors that worked into his betrayal. After all, coming from the same tribe as Yeshua, it's almost like family. And you know how sometimes when it comes to these kind of things, sometimes the sin of familiarity maybe would be setting in, and it's like, oh yeah, Yeshua, I know Yeshua, he's part of my family, he's part of my tribe. So perhaps that, remember Yeshua talking about the members of a household rising up against one another. So that could be one of the factors that worked into it. Judas. So it says in the Septuagint, it came to pass at that time that Judas went down from his brothers and came as far as to a certain man of Adullam. Again, a little bit different spelling, a little bit different pronunciation because of the spelling. It says, whose name was Eras. So you notice in the Greek, we have the postfix of the S, letter S. And this is part of the Greek naming convention. Okay, so Judah becomes Judas, and Hira or Ira becomes Iras. This is the Holy Peshitta Bible translation, or the Aramaic, the Syriac. It says in verse 1, and it occurred at that time, Yehuda came down from the presence of his brothers, and he departed to an Arlamite man, and his name was Kira. Let's see what we have in the Targum. It says it came, and it was at that time that Yehuda descended from his brothers. He turned away from them until he came to a man, an Adulamite, whose name was Hira. Let's pull up the Latin Vulgate. Voice of one, welcome and blessings multiplied to you. Good to see you over there on TikTok. Yeah, so the Vulgate, it says this. At that time, Judah went down from his brothers and turned into a certain Adulamite named Hiras. Okay, so let's see what we have in the Samaritan text. Samaritan. As it came to pass about that time that Yehuda departed from his brothers, and he turned aside to an Adulami person, and he was named Ayari. Okay, so A double Y's, AYY, AAREH. So that's A double Y double AREH. That's a different spelling there. Okay, moving on, verse 2 from the Masoretic, it says, and Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her. Septuagint says, and Judas saw that the daughter of a Canaanitish and Judas saw there the daughter of a Canaanitish man, whose name was Sava, and he took her and went into her. Okay, so we got the difference here of Canaanitish man versus a certain Canaanite in the Masoretic. The Syriac says, and Yehuda saw there a daughter of a Canaanite man. Again, Syriac agrees with the Septuagint that it should say Canaanite man, whereas the Masoretic, it just says certain Canaanite. Moving on, the Syriac says, and her name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. Targum says, there Yehuda saw the daughter of a Canaanite man. Again, Canaanite man. In brackets here says, merchant, whose name was Shua. He took her and consummated a marriage with her. A little bit different there. Consummated a marriage with her. Latin says, and he saw there, this would be the Vulgate or an English translation of the Vulgate. He saw there the daughter of a man of Canaan called Sue. Well, that's different. And taking her to wife, he went in unto her. And again, the Samaritan. And Yehuda saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite. So the Samaritan, the Masoretic is in line with the Samaritan, saying a certain Canaanite, as opposed to a Canaanite man, whose name was Shu, Shooh. And he took her and went into her. Okay. Verse 3, back to the Masoretic text. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. E-R. Septuagint, and she conceived and bore a son, and called his name Er. Now notice, in the Septuagint, it doesn't say he called his name Er, but it portrays it as if she's the one who called his name Er. Or Er. Syriac says, and she conceived, and she bore to him a son, and he called his name Er. Targum, she conceived and gave birth to a son, he named him Er. Vulgate, she conceived and bore a son and called his name Her, H-E-R. I would assume that is to be pronounced hair, though, or hair. And Samaritan, a little bit different here. And she conceived and bore a son, and she called him R, A-A-R. She called him R. So here's a manuscript variation, which is pretty much a borderline contradiction, because the other one's portrayed as if he's the one who named her. But Samaritan says he's the one who named him. And the Samaritan says she's the one who named him. So that's a borderline contradiction, if not a full-on contradiction. Going on, verse 4, she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Now, why would it say in the Masoretic? See, this is not consistent, right? I mean, why would he be the one, according to the Masoretic text, to name the first child, and she be the one to name the second child? It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be something's off there. The Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint is consistent in the sense that the very same way it words verse 3 is the very same way it words verse 4. So verse 4 says, and she conceived and bore a son again, and called his name Onan. So it doesn't say he called his name Onan. It kind of presents it in a way as if she's the one who called him Onan. Just like in verse 3, where it says, she conceived and bore a son and called his name Er. So verse 3 and verse 4 in the Septuagint seems to be consistent. It's consistent. The very same person, the very same way that Er was named is the same way that Onan was named. But not in the Masoretic text. You got this it's just kind of rough around the edges, in my opinion. Syriac says, and she conceived and she bore to him. Oh, excuse me, I'm on verse 4 now. And she conceived again, and she bore a son, and he called his name Onan. So the Syriac is consistent. in that both verses it says he's the one who named her. Or he's the one who named the child. He's the one who named the child in the third verse. He's the one who named the child in the fourth verse. So that's consistent. Even though the Septuagint makes it sound like it's that she's the one who named both of them, at least it sounds consistent because of the way that it's presented here. In verse 3, and called his name Er, and verse 4, and called his name Onan. And in Syriac says in verse 3, and he called his name Er, and in verse 4, and he called his name Onan. But the Masoretic is kind of offbeat here in my estimation. It's because in the Masoretic, verse 3, it's he called his name Er, and in the verse 4, it's she called his name Onan. So the first one was named by him, and the second one was named by her, but not so in the other texts. Let's see what the Targum has to say here. She conceived again and gave birth to a son. She named him Onan. So the Targum, no surprise there, follows more closely with the Masoretic. No surprise. In the Targum, having he named him Er in verse 3, and then she named him Onan in verse 4. Let's see what the Vulgate has to say. Vulgate says, and conceiving again, she bore a son and called him Onan. So even though, the Vulgate seems to be consistent, because in verse 3 it doesn't specify that he named the first child, and it doesn't say in verse 4 that he named the child either, but it puts it in a way that as if she did in both instances. Let's see what we have here in the Masoretic. It says, Samaritan. Samaritan says, and she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. So the Samaritan puts it like the Septuagint. But the Samaritan explicitly says in verse 3, and again, I'm going to try to show you guys. Verse 3 right there says, she called him R. Okay? So the Septuagint and the Samaritan present it as if she's the one who named the children. But the Syriac explicitly says that he's the one who named both children. The Vulgate makes it look like she's the one who named both children. And the Masoretic is kind of stuck in between with he's the one who named the first one and she's the one who named the second one. You see the differences? Julie says, Shalom, Shalom, Julie. Welcome and blessings multiplied to you and your family. So what do we get from comparing these manuscripts? I think we get more of a fuller understanding of the transmission of the text and the variations between the texts, and thus we can discern and interpret the common Masoretic text more clearly and more precisely as well, because we're not going to be looking at the Masoretic text like a lot of fundamental evangelical Christians would look at it to say, well, every single letter is absolutely perfect. Everything is perfect in the Masoretic text. I don't think we have any evidence to support that. But that's a good thing, because we want the truth. We don't want to worship something as if it's perfection. If it's not perfection, we want the truth. So the Masoretic text, being the youngest, arguably, of all these texts, seems to be a little bit more off. Moving on. Genesis chapter 38, verse 6. Then Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar, or Tamar. Septuagint. Oh, sorry. I missed a verse here. The Samaritan, it's the Masoretic, verse 5, And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Chesib when she bore him. So in this verse, it sounds like she's the one who named this child. In verse 4, in the Masoretic text, it explicitly tells us that she's the one who named the child. But in verse 3, it says that he is the one who named the child. Again, it seems to be like, it doesn't seem to be consistent there. You would think that the culture and perhaps even the beliefs of the characters here would establish who's the one to be naming the child, whether it's he's naming the child alone, or she's naming the child alone, or they both name the child together. But it's off in my opinion compared to the other texts. The other texts are more consistent, whereas either he named them all or she named them all. So Septuagint says, and she again bore a son and called his name Selom. So that's different from Shelah. Shelah versus Selom. It says here, and she was in Chaspi when she bore them. Now look at the difference here. Masoretic says he was at Chesib when she bore him. And the Septuagint says, and she was in Chasbi when she bore them. Speaking of all the children. The Syriac says, verse 5, and she again bore a son and called his name Shelah. And she ceased when she bore him. Wow. Okay. That's different. Right? So it just says she ceased when she bore him. It doesn't say that in the Masoretic text in the New King James. It doesn't say that in the Septuagint. It just says she was in Chasbi when she bore them. So the Syriac is quite different. Excuse me, quite different here. Regina says shalom, 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 welcome, blessings, blessings multiplied to you and your family. Good to see you. Hope all is well. Targum says, she conceived once again, and she gave birth to a son. She named him Shelah. He, Yehuda, was in Chesiv when she gave birth to him. So in the Targum, so the Targum pretty much follows closely with the Masoretic, pretty much the same. The Vulgate, she bore also a third. No. Okay, so it doesn't say third anywhere in the other text, does it? In the Masoretic, it doesn't say she bore a third. It doesn't specify a third. In the Septuagint, it doesn't say that she bore a third. It just says she again bore a son. In the Syriac, it doesn't say a third. It just says that she again bore a son. And even in the Targum, it doesn't say third. It just says she conceived once again and gave birth to a son. But the Vulgate, for some reason, specifies she bore also a third. Now, I'm wondering if this is... I'm just wondering if this is a translation error. But I you know what I did? So, because I'm thinking, how can there be so much difference? So what I did, take this text, this Latin, I put it into Google Translate, and it says she also gave birth to a third child, specifically third child, whom she named Selah. So that's, yeah. So that's really strange. She bore also a third. She called him Selah, after whose birth she ceased to bear any more. Okay. So the Vulgate doesn't say what the Masoretic says, whereas so the Masoretic, I just want to be super accurate here, says he was at Chasib when she bore him. Septuagint says she was in Chasib when she bore them. Syriac says she ceased when she bore him. Doesn't mention anything about he or her being in Chasib. The Targum says he, Yehuda, was in Chasib when she gave birth to him. So the Vulgate seems to be it's the Vulgate is more like the Syriac. So whatever text Jerome had when he translated the Vulgate, it wasn't from the same line of the Septuagint that we have here in the Brenton translation of the Septuagint, but it was more like the Syriac text, because the Syriac says she ceased when she bore him. It says nothing about Chasib or whatever. It just says that she ceased bearing, and this is what it says in the Vulgate as well. Okay, so let's see what it says in the Samaritan. It says she bore still another son and named him Shelah, and it was in Kaziba. Again, there's these double letters, K-A-Z-Z-E-B-A. Kaziba, when she bore him. Wow. So you see the differences here. This is arguably one of the oldest texts, if not the oldest text. And it doesn't say anything about she ceased to bear anymore. It says nothing like that. So after that, we got the Septuagint, which is very old as well. And the Septuagint says she was in Chasbi when she bore them. And then the Syriac is not as old as the Septuagint, but the Syriac is the first one we see that says, it doesn't say anything about Chasib or anything like that, but just rather, she ceased when she bore him. In the Vulgate, she ceased to bear any more. And then we got the Masoretic, which seems to maintain the oldest text that lines up with the Samaritan and Septuagint, saying that he was at Chasib when she bore him. At least, I know it doesn't necessarily line up as it says in the Septuagint. Says she was, but Masoretic says he was, whereas the Samaritan says she was. Yeah, so we have these different strains, if you will, of the manuscript. So somewhere along the line, and it seems like it happened somewheres around the time of Yeshua, give or take a few centuries. It seems like it happened somewheres around there, where the text went from he was at Chasib when she bore him to simply she ceased to bear anymore. Okay, let's go on. Verse 6 says, then Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Septuagint, Judas took a wife for Er, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar with a TH. Syriac, Yehuda took a woman for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Targum, Yehuda took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. The Latin Vulgate, Judah took a wife for her. Judah took a wife for Er. Okay, I almost... It's talking about Er. Er, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar with the TH. And the Samaritan, Yehuda, took a wife for Ar, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar, with double A's. Double A, T-double-A-M, double A-R. Okay. Verse 7. Septuagint, or I should say Masoretic, based from the New King James. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Now, you got to wonder why did this happen? What happened here? And as usual, the book of Genesis doesn't give us much detail at all. Just, hey, this happened. It doesn't really give us much, tells us the end, but not the process of what happened. So the Septuagint says, and Er, the firstborn of Judas, was wicked before the Lord, and God killed him. Syriac says, and Er, the firstborn of Yehuda, was evil before the Lord Jehovah, and the Lord Jehovah put him to death. The Targum says, Er, Yehuda's firstborn, was wicked in the eyes of, or before Adonai, and Adonai put him to death. Latin, and Er, the firstborn of Judah, was wicked in the sight of the Lord and was slain by him. Now, I want to go to the Sepharia and check out some of the commentaries to see what it says there. So, in the Samaritan, it says, and Ar, Yehuda's firstborn, was evil in the sight of Shema, and Shema killed him. Okay, I noticed this in the Samaritan, we don't have the tetragrammaton or any of these, the word Lord or Lord Jehovah or anything like that, but rather Shema. Okay, let's have a peek at Sepharia. Let me see if I can. Got it. Let's have a peek at Sepharia to see what Sepharia has to say about this. What is this? What's up with this? Because Genesis doesn't tell us anything. Go to Sepharia, Tanakh, Genesis, chapter 38, going down to verse 7. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to Yud-He-Vav-He, and Yud-He-Vav-He took his life. Commentary, Rashi. It says, like the wickedness of Onan, and committing the same sin, this must have been the case because of Onan. It is said in verse 10, and the Lord slew him also. Onan's death was for a similar reason as Er's death. Why did Er commit this sin? So that she would not bear children, and her beauty thereby become impaired. And this is found in Yevamot 34b. Ramban. Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Eternal. Scripture does not specify the nature of his wickedness as it did in the case of his brother. Instead, it simply states that he died for his own sin. It informs us that this was not by way of punishment of Judah for his role in the sale of Joseph, since the saving of Joseph's life by Judah compensated for his role in the sale. There was no case of death of a child in the house of the patriarchs except this one, who was wicked in the sight of the Eternal, since the race of the righteous is blessed. This is why Jacob mourned many days for his son Joseph, and he refused to comfort himself, for he considered this to be a great punishment to himself, quite apart from his love for him. Sforno says, the words "in the eyes of God" are not mentioned to tell us that he was not evil to his fellow human beings. Doesn't say much to us there. And Chizkuni is the sin that he did. The sin was that he did not sleep with his wife in such a way that she could become pregnant with his semen. Tamar had remained a virgin even after having been married to Onan, so that Yehuda was not guilty of sleeping with a close relative whose previous marriage had been consummated, so that she would have been forbidden to him on that score. Our author at this point raises the same question this editor had raised at the end of 38:1, that is, that they should not have been culpable until the age of 20. So, according to this, his sin was not reproducing, basically. Yeah, very, very interesting. Let's move on here. Verse 8. We'll see. I'm curious to see what the Legends of the Jews says about that one. Verse 8. And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brother." Septuagint says, and Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her as her brother-in-law and raise up seed to your brother." So, get this straight. Er had Tamar, but Er would not allow Tamar to get pregnant. So God found great offense in that and killed him. So then Onan, it was Onan's responsibility to have children with Tamar for his brother's sake, according to the Torah. Syriac says, and Yehuda said to Onan his son, "Go in unto the wife of your brother and do the part of a brother and raise up seed to your brother." The Targum says, and Yehuda said to Onan, "Consummate marriage with your brother's wife and fulfill the Yibum rite with her and establish seed for your brother." And the Samaritan says, and Yehuda said to Onan, "Go in to your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her and raise up seed for your brother." Verse 9, New King James, based upon the Masoretic, says, "But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother." Septuagint says, "But Onan, knowing that his seed would not be his, it came to pass that he went into his brother's wife, that he spilt it upon the ground, so that he should not give seed to his brother's wife." Syriac says, and Onan knew that the seed was not his. And when he entered on the wife of his brother, he destroyed it on the ground, so that he would not raise up seed to his brother. Targum says, and Onan knew that the descendants would not be his, called by his name. Whenever he cohabited with his brother's wife, he let it go to waste, destroyed his way on the ground, in order not to give or establish progeny to his brother. And go back here to the Vulgate. He, knowing that the children would not be his, he went in to his brother's wife. He spilled his seed upon the ground, lest children should be born in his brother's name. And finally, the Samaritan says, and Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, and when he went into his brother's wife, he spilled it on the ground in order not to give seed to his brother. Jim Taylor says, explain dinosaurs. Sorry, Jim, we're in deep study here of Genesis chapter 38. We're looking at all these different manuscripts and getting into all kinds of, we're just researching this quite deeply. By the way, Jim, I am live right now on YouTube. I'm live on Kick. I have an audience on various platforms here: YouTube, Kick, Facebook, Twitch, DLive, Rumble, Instagram, to name a few. So I appreciate your question, Jim. The problem is this is a special series that we're doing right now. We're doing it on the book of Genesis. I would encourage you, Jim, to follow, and especially come back on a Shabbat. Many Shabbats we're a little bit more. It's a little bit more of a casual meeting where we're open to talk about all kinds of different things. So, Jim, appreciate your question again. Thank you for asking. The problem is I can't. We can't let the train go off the tracks here, as we are studying very deeply into this very subject here, Judah and Tamar. Please, please stick around. And any questions regarding what we're reading, Judah, Tamar, Onan, any of this stuff, anything even remotely related to this stuff, feel free to ask. Again, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Hubert says, if a brother had kids with his dead brother's wife, these days people would judge harshly. But back then, it almost seems like an obligation. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It was considered to be a very important thing for a man to have offspring. And so, if the man got married and for some reason he didn't have any offspring, then it was the brother's responsibility to raise up offspring in his name. So it's kind of like an act of honor and respect to further and to preserve the name of your brother and the offspring in his name. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's continue here. What we're doing is we are reading from Genesis chapter 38. We are getting into this deeper than I can tell you one thing. I have never been to a Bible study, and I've been to many Bible studies. I've been to a fair number of churches. I've never been to a Bible study or a Bible school as well. I visited a couple of Bible schools and checked out what they were teaching and such. But I don't know of any Bible school or Bible study in the world that gets this deep into things. We are taking the common Masoretic Hebrew text and we're comparing it with an older version of the scriptures, the Samaritan. We're comparing it with the Septuagint, with the Syriac, all of which is older than the Masoretic Hebrew, also the Targums and the Vulgate. We're getting into this very deep and even getting into some of the extra biblical commentaries of some of the scholars and sages of old to see what they have to say about this kind of stuff. By the way, guys, if you like this stuff, make sure you leave a like. So in verse 10, it says, I'm reading from the New King James now, based upon the Masoretic text. It says, "And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. Therefore he killed him also." That's a lot of displeasure. That's a lot of displeasure. See, so what can we learn from this? We can learn how important it is to respect another person's progeny, another person's family, to respect the fact that how important it is to maintain a name throughout history. How important it is to the Lord. How important it is to God himself. Septuagint says, "And his doing this appeared evil before God, and he slew him also." Syriac says, "And what he did was evil before Lord Jehovah, and he put him to death, even him." I think it's important to understand that what this is talking about is something that later on down the road, Moses would write about, the obligation of a brother to maintain the name and the family line of his brother if his brother passed away. The Targum says, "What he did was evil in the eyes of before Adonai, and he also put him to death." The Latin Vulgate would say, "And therefore the Lord slew him because he did a detestable thing." Finally, one of the most oldest texts, the Samaritan, it says, "And what he did was displeasing in the sight of Shema, and he killed him also." Let's have a peek again. I know I'm kind of jumping the gun in a little bit because the way things are going here, I think it's probably going to be tomorrow night when we get into the Legends of the Jews. I'm really encouraged. I'm really interested and really intrigued to know what the Legends of the Jews would have to say about this. All of the extra biblical texts and teachings and doctrines that have been passed down through the thousands of years. So let's check out what some of these ancient sages and Jewish scholars have to say about this. Sepharia, this is Genesis chapter 38, verse 10. This is what he did was displeasing to Yud-He-Vav-He, who took his life also. Now, check out here the commentaries. The commentaries doesn't have anything to say here on this particular verse. That's interesting. Nothing here. Yeah, so I guess we'll just have to wait for the Legends of the Jews. Moving on, verse 11. New King James, based upon the Masoretic text, says, "Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, 'Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown.' For he said, 'Lest he also die like his brothers.' And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house." So again, see, Judah understood that this is very important, and he had another son. He had Shelah, so it's like telling Tamar, just wait until Shelah is old enough, and then Shelah will, will have children by you, and in the name of heir especially. You see, again, this is very, very important. We can learn a lot of lessons from this, that it's very important in the eyes of the Lord to treat each other with great respect, especially when it comes to family lines, in regards to anything, but especially in regards to your name, the family name. and to treat each other with great respect in that regard. So the Septuagint says, and Judas said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, sit a widow in the house of your father-in-law until Shalom, my son, be grown. For he said, lest he also die as his brothers. And Tamar departed and sat in the house of her father. Syriac says, and Yehuda said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain in the widowhood of your father's house until Shelah, my son, grows, because he said, lest he should die also as his brothers. And Tamar went, and she dwelt in her father's house. The Targum, Yehuda said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah is of age. He said, lest he also die like his brothers. Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Vulgate, I have to go back to, whoops, here we go here. Back to here, Vulgate. It says, wherefore Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grow up, for he was already afraid. For he was afraid lest he also might die as his brothers did. She went her way and dwelt in her father's house. Okay. And the Samaritan text, Yehuda said to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he said, unless he too die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Verse 12. Now, these verses are a little bit on the longer side, so I'll just take it verse by verse. Otherwise, I would take it a couple verses at a time. Verse 12, again, New King James, based upon the Masoretic, says, now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hirah, the Adulamite. Septuagint says, and the days were fulfilled, and Sava, the wife of Judas, died. So hold on a second. So in the Masoretic text it says, now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua died. But the Septuagint says, the days were fulfilled, and Sava, the wife of Judah, died. Shua, the wife of Judah. So in the Septuagint, it was Shua, or Sava, herself that died. And in the Masoretic, it was the daughter of Shua. Am I not reading this right? Is this not what it says? The Septuagint says it's Shua, or Sava, herself, whereas in the Masoretic, it says, no, it's her daughter that died. So, in this context, now I'm just kind of going by what makes more sense, what's more likely, between the texts. What is more likely to be the truth here? I think it makes a whole lot more sense that it's actually Shua, or Sava, herself that died, because in the context of this, Judah is looking for. Judah's the one who's comforted. So he's like looking for, he lost a wife. And so that could, help to understand how this whole process of how things happen with Tamar, because of Judah losing a wife, and so that makes a whole lot. That makes a whole lot more sense. Again, the Septuagint seems to me a little bit more a little bit more, in line here with with common sense. Anyways, it goes on to say, and Judas, being comforted, went to them that sheared his sheep, himself and Eros, his shepherd, the Adulamite, to Tamna. Syriac says, and days multiplied, and the daughter of Shua, the wife of Yehuda, died. So wouldn't this be the daughter of Judah then? And Yehuda was comforted, and he came up to his shearers of his flock, he and Kira, his friend, the Arlamite, to Tamnath. Targum says, many days passed, and Shua's daughter, the wife of Yehuda, died. Yehuda sought consolation and went up to his sheep shearers and his friend Hira, the Adulamite, to Timnah. The Latin Vulgate. After many days were passed, the daughter of Su, the wife of Judah, died. And when he had taken comfort after his mourning, he went up to Tamnas, to the shearers of his sheep, he and Hiras, the Adulamite, the shepherd of his flock. And the Samaritan says, and after the days became many, and Shua's daughter, the wife of Yehuda, died. And Yehuda was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnata, he and his friend Aare, the Adilami. John says, reminds me of this passage in 2 Samuel, which I recently read. The thing David had done displeased the Lord, in reference to David, Uriah, and Bathsheba. Very interesting. Yeah, all right. Moving on here. Verse 13. And it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place that was on the way of Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. Septuagint says, and it was told Tamar his daughter-in-law, saying, behold, your father-in-law goes up to Tamnah to shear his sheep. And having taken off the garments of her widowhood from her, she put on a veil and ornamented her face, and sat by the gates of Anan, which is in the way of Tamnah, for she saw that Salom was grown, but he gave her not to him for a wife. So differences here. So it says she ornamented her face, which it doesn't say in the Masoretic text. It just says she wrapped herself. In the Masoretic text, it says sat in an open place, which is on the way to Timnah. But in the Septuagint, it says she sat by the gates of Anan, which is in the way to Tamnah. Syriac, verse 13 says, and they told Tamar, and they said to her, behold, your father-in-law went up to Tamnath to shear his flock. And she put away the clothes of her widowhood from her, and she was covered with a veil, and she was adorned. So again, this seems to be a little bit more like the Septuagint as opposed to the Masoretic saying simply that she wrapped herself. It says, and she sat in the crossing of the roads, which is on the road to Timnath, because she saw that Shelah had grown, and she had not been given to him. Targums says, Tamar was told, behold, your father-in-law has come to Timnah to shear his sheep. She took off her widow's garb, covered herself with a veil, and disguised or adorned herself. So disguised. Adorned herself. She sat at the crossroads, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah had come of age, and she had not been given to him for a wife. Latin Vulgate says, it was told Tamar that her father-in-law was come up to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she put off the garments of her widowhood and took a veil, and changing her dress, sat in the crossway that leads to Timnah, because Shelah was grown up and she had not been married to him. So changing her dress, as opposed to wrapping herself, as opposed to, so Masoretic says she wrapped herself. The Septuagint says she ornamented her face. The Syriac says that she was adorned. The Targum says she, where is it now here? Disguised or adorned herself. And the Vulgate says she changed her dress. See the differences here? Now, the Samaritan says, and she removed her widow's garments, and okay, verse 13 says, and it was told to Tamar, his daughter-in-law. Hold on a second. And it was told to Tamar, his daughter-in-law. Now, is that what it says? That does it say that in the Masoretic? No, it just simply says it was told Tamar. The Septuagint just says, oh, it does say daughter-in-law in the Septuagint. I missed that. So in the Septuagint it says daughter-in-law. Not in the Masoretic. In the Samaritan it says daughter-in-law. The Syriac doesn't have it. I wouldn't expect the Targums to have it. Nope. The Latin, no. So again, we have the Samaritan in the Septuagint, the oldest text, agreeing that it says it was told Tamar, her daughter-in-law. Okay. All right. Verse 15, when Judah saw her, she thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? Genesis chapter 38, verse 15 and 16. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, for she covered her face, and he knew her not. And he went out of his way to her and said to her, let me come in to you. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give to me? What will you give me if you should come in to me? The Syriac says, and Yehudah saw, and he considered her as a harlot because her face was covered. And he turned aside to her on the road and said to her, come, I shall come in to you, because he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said to him, what will you give when you come in to me? And the Targum says, Yehuda saw her and thought she was a harlot, like one who goes outside, because she had covered her face. He turned aside to her on the road and said, "Please now let me be with you," for he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me for the privilege of being with me?" The Latin says, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face, lest she should be known. And going to her, he said, "Suffer me to lie with you," for he knew her not to be his daughter-in-law. And she answered, "What will you give me to enjoy my company?" And the Samaritan says, and Yehuda saw her, and as Yehuda saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. And Yat, Y-A-A-T, Yat, turned him towards her on the road, and said, "Here now, let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" Verse 17. I'm going to read verse 17. Yeah, we're verse 17 and 18. And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord, and your staff that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. Septuagint, and he said, "I will." Septuagint, and he said, "I will send you a kid of the goats from my flock." And she said, "Well, if you will give me an earnest until you send it." And he said, "What is the earnest that I shall give you?" And she said, "Your ring, your bracelet, and the staff in your hand." And he gave them to her, and went into her, and she conceived by him. Syriac says, and he said, "I shall send a kid of the goats from the flock." And she said, "If you give to me a pledge until you send it." And he said, "What pledge shall I give to you?" And she said, "Your ring and your robe and your staff that is in your hand." And he gave them to her, and he went in unto her, and went into her, and she conceived from him. Targum. He said, "I will send you a kid from the flock." She said, "Only if you give me some security until you send it." He said, "What security shall I give you?" She said, "Your signet ring, your wrap, and your staff that is in your hand." He gave them to her, and was with her, and she became pregnant by him. Vulgate. He said, "I will send you a kid out of the flock." And when she said again, "I will suffer what you will if you give me a pledge till you send what you promise," Judah said, What will you have for a pledge?" She answered, "Your ring and bracelet, and the staff which you hold in your hand." The woman therefore at one copulation conceived. A little bit more detail there. Samaritan says, and he said, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "If you will give a pledge until you send it." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, "Your seal, your cord, and your stick that's in your hand." And he gave them to her, and went into her, and she conceived by him. Verses 18 and 19 from the King James, from the Masoretic, says, "Then he said, What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, I should do let's do 19 through 21. It says, "She arose and went away, and laid aside her veil, put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent a young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" the Septuagint says, and she arose and departed, and took her veil from off her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judas sent the kid of the goats by the hand of his shepherd the Adullamite to receive the pledge from the woman, and he found her not. And he asked the men of the place, Where is the harlot who was in Nain by the wayside? And they said, There was no harlot here. I missed that in the Masoretic. It says there was no harlot here. They said there's no harlot here. The Syriac. She arose and went, and she put away the veil from her, and she put on the clothes of her widowhood. And Yehuda sent the kid of goats by his friend the Arlamite to take the pledge from the hands of the woman, and he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, and said, Where is the harlot who dwelt at the parting of the roads? And they said, There's no harlot here. The Targum says she got up and went away, and she took off her veil and put on her widow's garb. Yehuda sent the goat kid with his friend the Adullamite to retrieve the security from the woman, but she could not find her, or he could not find her. He asked the men of her place, Where is the harlot that was at the junction on the road? They said, There was or is no harlot here. The Vulgate, she arose and went her way, putting off the apparel which she had taken, put on the garments of her widowhood. It's like what you wear tells a lot about you, especially in this particular context. Verse 20. And Judah sent a kid by his shepherd, the Adullamite, that he might receive the pledge again, which he had given to the woman. But he, not finding her, asked the men of that place, Where is the woman that sat in the crossway? And when they all made the answer, There was no harlot in this place. And again, the Samaritan says, She arose and departed, and removed her veil, and put on her widow's garments. Yehuda sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adulami to receive the pledge of the woman's hand. He did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, saying, Where is the temple prostitute who was at the road at Inem? And they said, there has been no temple prostitute here. And I don't know why the footnote here is on verse 19 about, remember earlier how we read in verse 16 where it says, he turned unto her by the way and said, Come, I pray you, let me come into you. And it says here in the Samaritan, and Yat, Y-A-A-T, turned him towards her on the route. And he said, Here now, let me come into you, for he did not know it was his daughter-in-law. Yat, there's a footnote that says Yat is an angel according to Israelite Samaritan tradition. So in the Samaritan, it says that an angel appeared. An angel appeared. An angel directed Judah into Tamar, according to the Samaritan. Not found anywhere else. HUD says, Hi, how's it going? I hope God bless your day. Thank you very much, HUD. It's going good. How's it going with you? I hope God blessed you even more. Okay. Moving on. Verse 22 and 23. New King James, based upon the Masoretic. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of the place said, there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed, for I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. Septuagint says, and he returned to Judas and said, I have not found her, and the men of the place say there is no harlot here. And Judas said, let her have them, but let us not be ridiculed. I sent this kid, but you have not found her. Syriac says, and he returned to Yehudah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place were saying, there's no harlot here. And Yehudah said, she may take it, lest I be a laughingstock. Behold, I have sent this kid, and you have not found her. Targum. He returned to Yehudah and said, I did not find her. And the men of her place also said that there was or is no harlot there or here. Yehudah said, let her take it, lest we are humiliated, become a laughingstock. Behold, I sent her this kid, and you could not find her. Latin Vulgate says, he returned to Judah and said to him, I have not found her. Moreover, the men of that place said to me that there never sat a harlot there. Judah said, let her take it to herself. Surely she cannot charge us with a lie. I sent the kid which I promised, and you did not find her. Samaritan. And he returned to Yehudah and said, I did not find her. And also the men of that place said, there has been no temple prostitute here. And Yehudah said, let her take it, otherwise we will become a laughingstock. Behold, I sent this goat, and you did not find her. Okay. Verse 24 and 25. King James, based upon the Masoretic text, says, and it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with the child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet and cord and staff. Septuagint says, and it came to pass after 3 months that it was told Judas, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law has grievously played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judas said, bring her out and let her be burnt. And as they were bringing her, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man whose these things are. And she said, see, whose is this ring and bracelet and staff? Syriac says, and it was after 3 months, and it was told Yehudah, and they said to him, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has committed fornication, and behold, she is pregnant by fornication. And Yehudah said, bring her out, and she will burn. Verse 25, and when they brought her out, she sent to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these things belong, I am pregnant. And she said, see, whose is the ring and the robe and the staff, these things? and staff these things. Targum. About 3 months later, Yehuda was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been promiscuous. Moreover, her promiscuity has resulted in pregnancy. Yehuda said, take her and let her be burned. She was being taken out, and she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, from him am I pregnant. She said, please now recognize whom this signet, wrap, and staff belong. And the Latin Vulgate says, behold, after 3 months they told Judas, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. She has appeared to have a big belly. And Judas said, bring her out that she may be burned. But when she was led to execution, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these things belong, I am with child. See whose ring and bracelet and staff this is. Samaritan. And it was about 3 months later that Yehuda was informed, saying, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she has also conceived by prostitutes. It says by prostitutes, whereas in the Masoretic it says by prostitution. Then Yehuda said, bring her out and let her be burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I have conceived by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, examine and see whose signet, ring, and cord and stick these are. Couple more verses. Julie says, Brother Enoch, a temple prostitute, do they mean at God's temple? How is that allowed? Yeah, it's a good question, Julie. Thank you for asking. As far as I know, it would not be God's temple. This would be the temple of some other idols, like Baal and these other kind of idols like that. That's what it means by temple prostitute, like a Shira, these kind of quote unquote gods. Very good question, Julie. Thank you for asking. New King James, based upon the Masoretic, 26:27. Let's just do 26, and then we'll wrap it up with the verses 27 to 30 after that. 26 says, Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son, and he never knew her again. The Septuagint says, and Judas knew them and said, Tamar is cleared rather than I, for as much as I gave her not to Shalom my son, and he knew her not again. Yeah, Julie says, that makes sense. Thank you. Well, thanks again for asking. Awesome question. Hubert says, Canaanite Ashtoreth worship. That's the temple. Awesome. Yes. Thank you, Huberts. And again, thanks, Julie. Syriac, and Yehuda knew, and she said, and Yehuda knew and said, she is innocent more than I. Because of this, I did not give her to Shelah my son, and he did not have sexual relations with her again. Targum. Yehuda recognized them and said, "She is righteous. It is me. It is from me that she conceived, inasmuch that I did not give her to my son Shelah." He was not intimate with her anymore. Vulgate, but he acknowledging the gifts said, "She is juster than I, because I did not give her to Selah my son." However, he knew her no more. That's repentance, not doing it again. Okay, so actually, you know what? Let's do 2 verses at a time here, 27, 28, and then we'll do the last 2 verses after that, just to kind of break it up a little bit. New King James, again, based upon the Masoretic, it says, "Now it came to pass at that time for giving birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, This one came out first." Septuagint says, "And it came to pass when she was in labor, that she also had twins in her womb. And it came to pass, as she was bringing forth, one thrust forth his hand, and the midwife, having taken hold of it, bound upon," I think this should be his hand, "a scarlet thread," it says hid hand, saying, This one shall come out first." The Syriac says, "And it was the time of her delivery, and behold, twins were in her womb. And it was that when she delivered, he gave his hand, and the midwife took a thread of scarlet, and she tied it on his hand, and she said, This one will come forth first." Targum. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. And as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. The midwife took it and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, This one emerged first. Latin Vulgate. "And when she was ready to be brought to bed, there appeared twins in her womb. And in the very delivery of the infants, one put forth a hand, whereon the midwife tied a scarlet thread, saying, This shall come forth the first." And the Samaritan says, "And it came about at the time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. And it took place while she was giving birth, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied scarlet on his hand, saying, This one came out first." Okay, verse 29 and verse 30 reads like this from the Masoretic. "Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, How did you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Septuagint. And when he drew back his hand, then immediately came forth his brother. And she said, Why has the barrier been cut through because of you? And she called his name Pharez. I noticed that it seems like the woman usually names the child, right? In a lot of these passages, and that's again a little bit that I think that would go against the Masoretic in what we read earlier in this chapter, saying that that it wasn't the woman to name the firstborn, but it was the man. Whereas the other manuscript says the women, and some of the other manuscripts that would be that the woman named all of them. Anyways, it says in verse 30 here from the Septuagint, "And after this came forth his brother, and on whose hand was the scarlet thread, and she called his name Zara." Syriac. And when he returned his hand, his brother came out, and she said, how a breach is breached upon you. And she called his name Pharez. And after that, his brother came out, on whose hand was the thread of scarlet, and she called his name Zarach. And the Targum, when he put back his hand, behold, his brother emerged, and she said, with what great strength you have pushed yourself. He named him Peretz. So, hold on a second. So the Syriac says she called him Pharez. The Septuagint says she called him Pharez. But the Targum says he did. Verse 30, then his brother emerged, the one upon whose hand was the scarlet thread. He named him Zorach. It says he named him. The Syriac says she named him. The Septuagint says she named him. Let's see what the Vulgate says. The Vulgate says, verse 29, but he drawing back his hand, the other came forth. And the woman said, why is the partition divided for you? And therefore called his name Pharez. Afterward his brother came out, on whose hand was the scarlet thread, and she called his name Zara. Samaritan, and it came about as he drew back his hand, and behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made upon us. Now, wait a second. Upon us. A breach upon us. The Masoretic says a breach upon you. The Septuagint says why has this barrier been cut through because of you? Syriac says a breach upon you. Targum where is it now? Just with what great strength you have pushed yourself. But the Latin says, oh, hold on a second. Partition divided for you. And the Samaritan says, what a breach you have made upon us. And the Samaritan says, she called his name Pharez. Verse 30, and after then, his brother came out, who had the scarlet on his hand, and she called his name Zara. Yeah, okay. So that is the entire chapter in all, was it, how many manuscripts? Masoretic, Septuagint, Syriac, Targum, Vulgate, and Samaritan. So there you have it, folks. We went through the entire chapter in all 6 manuscripts, and we saw some interesting variations and some pretty some borderline contradictions, if you will. Like, I mean, who's the one that names the child, she or he? So we saw some contradictions, we saw some variants, and we went through the entirety of that chapter in the canonical texts with using all of the 6 most well-known manuscript families. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and tomorrow, Lord willing, let's do the Legends of the Jews on this. The Legends of the Jews, I can just imagine what it has to say. It's going to be very, very interesting. All right, guys, so that'll be it for tonight. If you haven't already, please leave a like, subscribe, and follow. And we'll see you again, Lord willing, tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. 7:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Okay? Thanks to y'all. All right. Hubert says, thank you. Blessings all. Thank you as well, Hubert's blessings multiplied back to you and yours. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for the likes. Appreciate that. Yeah, okay, guys. Tomorrow, Monday, that'll be September 9th, okay? And in case you're listening to this in a future date, that's September 9th, 2024, but that'll be Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and we will read what it says in the Legends of the Jews about this whole story. I can just imagine what we're going to get into tomorrow. You guys are awesome. Keep on keeping on. Keep on pressing in. Keep on calling on him, and he will show you great and mighty things. Chipmunk says, Shalom, good study. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Chipmunk. Blessings to you and yours. Have a wonderful night. Okay, guys, as always, love you guys, and I pray the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, and give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen, amen. We'll see you guys tomorrow.